It is good. It's good to be here. If we haven't met you yet, my name is Zach, and I am one of the pastors here. And if you have a Bible, I would love to invite you to turn to the book of Matthew chapter 7. Matthew chapter 7. If you don't have a Bible and you'd like one, simply raise your hand. We have some people that would love to bring you one this morning. Highly encourage you to follow along. If you are using one of our Bibles, the page numbers will be on the screen behind me. If you have your own Bible, I would not try those page numbers. I don't think it'll work out for you as well. Believe it or not, we have 3 weeks left of this series. Since the beginning of the year, since January 4th, since my first Sunday as your lead pastor, we've been exploring this question together. What if Jesus was serious? What if Jesus really meant all of the things that he said? What if he was serious? And so we've been working through this sermon of Jesus, the Sermon on the Mount. And this morning, we are moving into the final chapter of this sermon. So Matthew chapter 7, and we're going to pick up in verse 1. Jesus continues and he says, "Do not judge, or you too will be judged. For in the same way you judge others, you will be judged. And with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, 'Let me take the speck out of your eye,' when all the time there is a plank in your own eye? You hypocrite! First, take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye." So Jesus moves into this next section of this sermon. And if we ask the question, what if Jesus was serious, then we need to spend some time this morning talking about judgment. Now, when Jesus uses the word judge, he means like a pronouncement of guilt. So what Jesus is saying is he's saying, do not judge, but really what he's saying is do not decide another's guilt. Don't take it upon yourself to try to control someone by declaring their fate. Don't try to control someone and say, hey, if you don't shape up, you're headed here. Like, this is what's going to happen. Jesus is saying, don't try to control someone by declaring their fate. Don't try to pass any kind of judgment. Don't try to use judgment as some kind of control over other people. He says, because when you do that, you're playing God, and that's not your job. Now, I want to just acknowledge that for those of us in here who are followers of Jesus, people who would call themselves Christians, we can read this passage and it can raise all sorts of questions about things like accountability and checks and balances. Like, how do you hold another Christian, another believer, how do you hold another Christian accountable for their actions, but also not judge them? Like, how do you not condone sin and yet not judge? But we have to remember there is a huge difference between holding someone accountable for the sin in their life and pronouncing judgment on someone. On one hand, there's those of us who follow Jesus, and there are times when you come alongside another Christian and you say, hey, we're on this journey with Jesus together, and there are some things in my life that are out of alignment, and there are some things in your life that are out of alignment. So how do we help each other? How do we carry each other's mats, to borrow the language from one of our men's small groups? This is important and good and part of what it means to be the church and to follow Jesus. But that isn't what Jesus is coming down on here. Jesus is directly attacking the moments that would happen in his days when people would look at the actions of another person and based on those actions just pronounce judgment. You have done this, and so this is the consequence. It was a way of controlling people. They would look at someone's actions and they would decide their fate. They were playing the role of God. There's a huge difference between holding another believer accountable. Notice I say believer, because sometimes Christians like to try to hold people accountable who wouldn't even share our worldview. Somebody who doesn't follow Jesus, church, God, Bible, of course they're acting differently. Why wouldn't they? We can't hold them accountable to something they don't believe. There's a huge difference between holding a believer accountable for sin and trying to control people. Are we tracking? And then after this, Jesus paints this picture. And he talks about specks of sawdust and planks. And for some reason, I think it's because it's the Bible and it's Jesus. But for some reason, when we read this, what can be missed in this is that it's funny. It's funny. Jesus paints a funny picture to show the absurdity of what's happening, and it's brilliant. Jesus says, don't focus on the grain, the speck, the single grain of sawdust in someone else's eye, while there's a plank in your own eye. Jesus says, hey, you are worried about this little speck of sawdust that is in someone else's eye. Meanwhile, at the same time, you are walking around with a piece of wood sticking out of your head. I need you to... It's funny. Imagine if this was attached to my head and I was walking around and we're like, hey, excuse me, your shoe's untied. You'd be like, yeah, dude, you got bigger issues, right? Excuse me, you got a little something right there, and I got a piece of wood. Do you see what Jesus is doing here? Jesus is saying, hey, why don't we start with the big piece of wood? What Jesus is really doing is he's talking about sin and struggle and all the ways that we get it wrong. And he's saying, no. He's saying, why don't we do this? Why don't we hold up a mirror, and why don't we start here? Jesus says, look, you're worried about the little thing here. Why don't we start here? Before you're worried about anything anyone else is doing, Jesus says, why don't you start by looking at yourself? He says, look here. Because church, it's easy. It's easy to see the faults of others and yet be completely oblivious or intentionally ignore our own faults. Right? Are we tracking? It's easy to judge people and make them feel terrible and bad and come down on them for some of the things in their life. It's easy to rant and preach against sins and issues that we personally don't struggle with, while at the same time living all sorts of other kinds of ways that don't honor God. It's easy to rant against sins that we don't struggle with, church. And I need you to sit with that and ask yourself, what does that mean for me? Because Jesus says, before you pass judgment on a community, on a people, on someone whose life may be different than your own, first start here. I have really strong opinions about issues and sins that don't affect my life in the least. I don't struggle with that, but it sucks that you do. And Jesus says, no. Why don't we start here? Why don't we start here? And once you've dealt with this, then perhaps you'll have the grace and the compassion and the love to talk to other people. Are we tracking? Jesus says, you want to picket and boycott and yell about the sanctity of life and family values? Well, why don't you Michael Jackson it, and why don't you start with the man in the mirror first? All right, if you want to be upset about that, well, why don't we start with James chapter 1 that says, religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless as this, to look after orphans and widows in their distress. Or here in the book of Romans where Paul says, love does no harm to a neighbor. Therefore, love is the fulfillment of the law. So really, what do I want you to do with people whose sin may look different than yours? Love them. Love them. Love does no harm to a neighbor. Therefore, if it's harming anyone in any kind of way, that's not what God calls us to. Are we tracking? Jesus gets awkward in this sermon. Like, this is hard. What if he was serious, though? Let's keep going, because it gets good. Verse 6. What in the world? Verse 6. He says, do not give dogs what is sacred. Do not throw your pearls to pigs. If you do, they may trample them under their feet and turn and tear you to pieces. Now, if you're like me, when you read this little verse, this one little verse, perhaps your first reaction, if you're like me, your first reaction is something along the lines of, what? What? Like they're dogs, pigs, pearls. Like, listen, I just got used to the speck and the plank, and I was thinking about a board and some sawdust, and now there's pigs and dogs. Like, Jesus, Jesus, what's going on here? Right? First service, there were some people visiting for the first time, and they told me between services, they were like, I walked in, and I saw a pig on the stage, and I was hoping that eventually you would address it. they were like, I don't know if there's always a pig on the stage. Like they've never been here before. They're like, maybe there's always a pig on the stage, and that's just the way they roll here, Evolution. And I'm like, no, this is my pig. His name is McRib. I let my daughter name him. I gave her two choices. We can either call the pig Bacon or call the pig McRib, and she chose McRib. So this is McRib, and here's the thing. I didn't grow up around farm animals. I didn't grow up around pigs. But also, at no point in my life have I had a desire to find a pig, get some pearls, and be like, here you go. Here you go. Get them. Do something. There you go. Like, I read this command of Jesus, and I gotta be honest with Jesus. This wasn't something that I was ever tempted to do in the first place, right? At no point where I'm like, oh, Jesus, thank you so much, because I saw a pig, and I had some pearls, and no. At no point was that like, hey, this is where I think this should be headed. No, I was never. Now, pearls are a good thing. Okay, pearls are valuable. These are fake. These are not valuable. Don't try to collect them. You can't pay your rent. But pearls, like real ones, are valuable. We would agree on that. And pigs, it's not that pigs are bad. Pigs have a purpose. Pearls have a purpose. So it's not something good, pearls, versus something bad, pigs. That's not what's going on here. It's just that pigs are something altogether different. Jesus has just warned his audience, don't judge. Don't proclaim judgment. And now he follows this warning about judgment with a warning about another kind of control. Because to judge is to control somebody through negativity. But when he talks about pearls and pigs, Jesus is saying, not only do you need to trust me, but you also need to give up control and trust others to my care as well. And one of the ways that sometimes we try to control others is that we over and over and over give them good things that they simply aren't ready for. How many of you have seen a relationship where you witness love bombing or just gifts after gifts after gifts, and if I just give you enough gifts, then maybe you will love me? Or how many of us know a person who grew up in church? Jesus, church, God, Bible, they knew all of the things. And what happened was it was rammed down their throat in a kind of dictatorship kind of way at a stage in their development that wasn't appropriate, and now, as an adult, they want nothing to do with it. How many of you know somebody like that? Yeah, the kid who grows up in a Christian home and then goes off to a Christian college and walks away from all of it. Is it a good thing to tell people about Jesus, to educate them in the way of Christianity? Yes. But it also matters how we do it. Because sometimes there's a chance that the person's not ready for it yet. Or it's that person and you keep trying to tell them about Jesus and they want nothing to do with it. And you keep trying and telling them about this life that God has for them, this good, abundant, free, wonderful life, and they're just not interested. And perhaps it's just that they're not ready for it yet. And so Jesus says you can control people with judgment, but you can also try to control people with good things. And when you do that, it's like giving pearls to pigs. They don't know what to do with them. They're not ready for that. Are we tracking? Does this make sense? Let's keep going. Verse 7. Jesus continues and he says, ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find. Knock and the door will be opened to you. For everyone who asks receives. The one who seeks finds, and the one who knocks, the door will be open. Which of you, if your son asks for bread, will give him a stone? Or if he asks for a fish, will give him a snake? If you then, though you are evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father in heaven give good gifts to those who ask him? So, in everything, do to others what you would have them do to you. For this sums up the law and the prophets. So Jesus follows verse 6, this warning that we shouldn't try to control people with good things and that we should entrust others to his care. And he follows it with this directive to bring things to him instead of trying to control people in negative ways through judgment and even positive ways through the giving of pearls. Instead of trying to control people, ask, seek, knock. I remember a few years ago, I was traveling back from Wichita, and I was right, it was like midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning. I had just flown into Wichita, and I was driving back, and this was years ago, and I got to around Newton, and all of the dash lights on my truck came on all at the same time, which is like not a clever party trick. Like that's a problem usually when that happens. And then it started to lose not altitude, it started to lose speed. I was like, that's not the right word. It started to lose speed. And I was like, oh, this is a problem. And so I pulled off in Newton around Bethel, and I parked in one of their parking lots. And it's like 12:30 in the morning. And I'm like, who do I call? Like, I am now stuck in Newton. I know my wife is asleep, so that'll be and we have young kids, so she can't leave to come and pick me up. What do I do? And so I ended up having to call a friend who came and picked me up and brought me home and then was able to help me get my car towed. But if I had just sat there in my truck and been like, well, I guess I can sleep in my truck and wait until morning and then eventually, how many of you, as you are listening to this story, would be like, you could have called me? Pastor Zach, if you're ever call, I know the hands that I see. I see Jason is already angry that he didn't know about this whole story and that I didn't call him, right? The same for Jacob Davis. He's like, what do you mean? That I didn't know you then. Get off me. So Jesus, in talking about trying to control people through judgment and trying to control people through good things, follows it up with ask, seek, knock. As we look at our relationships with other people, instead of trying to control, there's simple ask. Hey, I need help. There's seeking, and there's knocking. But it goes deeper than that. He's talking about how we treat each other, but it's deeper than that. It's really about how we view God. And if we believe that God can really be trusted. And so Jesus reminds us, he says, which of you, if you're as a father, as a parent, if your son asks you for bread, who would instead give him a stone? He uses an illustration to remind his audience that God is a good Father. We talked about this last week, and we've looked at how God defines himself as Abba, Dad, that God is a good Father, and that God will take care of us. And then he ends this section in verse 12. And he says, so in everything, do to others what you would have them do to you. For this sums up the law and the prophets. This sums up the law and the prophets. So you can either read the entire Old Testament or you can read verse 12. If you've been with us since the beginning, that was funny. There's like the Cliff Notes version of the Old Testament is one verse. If you've been with us since the beginning of the series, you remember that Jesus says earlier in the Sermon on the Mount that he didn't come to abolish, to do away with the law and the prophets, but to fulfill them. The law and the prophets, the entire Old Testament, all the way up until this moment for Jesus. And Jesus says you can boil the whole thing down into one phrase. And everything, do to others what you would have them do to you. Now, this phrase that Jesus uses, do to others what you would have them do to you, how many of you have heard this phrase before? Yeah. What is this called? The golden rule. Both services did so good knowing that this is the golden rule. This is what's known as the golden rule. And most of us would assume that this verse, this passage, must be where the golden rule originates. However, this isn't the only place that you find the golden rule. The Hindu religion teaches this, as people gifted with intelligence and purified souls should always treat others as they themselves wish to be treated. Another Indian religion, Jainist, their religion says a man should wander about treating all creatures in the world as he himself will be treated. Taoists say regard your neighbor's gain as your own gain and regard your neighbor's loss as your own loss. And then a generation before Jesus, an ancient Jewish teacher, Rabbi Hittel, said this. He says, what thou thyself hatest, do not to thy neighbor. This is the whole law. The rest is commentary. Go learn it. And these are just a few that I pulled. The golden rule exists in some form or fashion in all of the great world religions. So why is it any different? What's so special about it for followers of Jesus? For followers of Jesus, the golden rule, this command to treat others, to act towards others the way you would want people to act towards you. For followers of Jesus, this is not the same as these other religions or faith traditions, because for Christians, this command is rooted in remembering. It's rooted in remembering, in remembering that all of this, that it's all grace. It's all a gift. We treat others how we want to be treated because God has given us more than we ever deserve. And we have to stop there, and we have to live there for a second, and here's why. And I need you to hear me this morning. I think a lot of times some of us struggle with the golden rule because we don't love ourselves. And so I read, treat others how I want to be treated, and I don't feel that I'm worthy to be treated with any sort of dignity, respect, or love. And I think we have to start there. And so for the follower of Jesus, we follow this rule because the truth is that God has given us more than we ever deserve. And yes, we show grace and kindness and compassion to others because we want to be shown those things, but we do it more than that because God has shown us grace and kindness and compassion. And first and foremost, I know that I am loved and valued and created by God. So I know that who I am in Christ, and so I can love myself well, and it helps me love my neighbor well. We love our neighbors. We practice the golden rule because when we were at our worst, Jesus was broken open and poured out for us. The Bible tells us that God demonstrates his own love for us in this. While we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Jesus was broken open and poured out for us while we were at our worst. We did nothing to earn it, to deserve it, while we were still sinners. And so we have moments like this morning where we celebrate in what's called communion, or the Lord's Supper, sometimes called Mass or Eucharist. And Eucharist means good gift. So we have moments this morning where we come to this communion table and we take a piece of bread, we take some juice, and we remember. We remember that it's all grace, it's all a gift. We take this meal, and this meal reminds us that ultimately all of us are connected to this movement that's been going on for thousands of years. We take this bread and this cup, and we are reminded that we show love to our neighbors, that we do to others because God first loved us. And so we take a piece of bread, and we remember that this love that we're called to was first demonstrated by Jesus, whose body was broken. And we take this cup, and we are reminded that we treat others with forgiveness because the blood of Jesus was shed for the forgiveness of the entire world. And so this morning we come to this table. I'm going to invite the band to come up and join me as we move into this moment. And as we move into this moment, one of the first Christians, a guy named Paul, when he talks about communion, he says that before we enter into this meal, before we take communion, he says that we should examine ourselves. And part of this examination is that we look inward, that we spend time in what's called confession. And confess, the word confess, it simply means to agree with. To confess is to dig up all of our junk and have the guts to face it. To confess is to own up to our stuff. And so we confess. And we acknowledge all of the ways that we haven't loved God with our whole selves. All of the ways that we haven't loved our neighbors and practiced the golden rule. We confess, we acknowledge it. And then we are reminded that God forgives us. That God forgives us again and again and again because God is a good Father. And like a good Father, He forgives again and again and again. And so maybe as you come to this table, maybe you need to ask God to help you. Maybe you need to ask God to forgive you for the ways that you've judged, that you've tried to control people in critical ways instead of just looking in the mirror at your own self. Maybe you need to ask for forgiveness for pointing out the specks in the eyes around you, all the while there's your own junk. It's like a 2x4 sticking out of your eye. And maybe this morning you need to ask forgiveness as you take the bread and this cup, and that you need to be reminded that first, again, you deal with your own stuff. Or perhaps for you, it's trying to control others with good things. And even trying to force things on people, they're simply not ready for it. And it's hurting them, and it's hurting your relationship with them. And so maybe you need to take the bread and the cup. Maybe for you, it's about repenting and asking God to help you give up control and instead trust Him with these people. Maybe as you come forward and take this bread and this cup, you need to be reminded that the invitation is to ask, to seek, to knock, and that God promises that He will respond like an Abba, like a father. The invitation for us as followers of Jesus is to remember. It's to remember. It's to remember that on the night He was betrayed, Jesus took bread, and after He'd given thanks, He broke it. And He said, "This is my body, which is broken for you. Every time you eat this, do this in remembrance of me." And in the same manner, after supper, Jesus took the cup. And after giving thanks, he raised the cup and he said, "This cup represents the new covenant found in my blood for the forgiveness of sin. Every time you drink it, remember me." Here at Revolution Church, we practice what's called open communion. What that means is you don't have to be a member or a partner. You don't have to sign a form. You don't have to do anything other than say yes to Jesus to participate and partake at this table. Even if you've never said yes to Jesus before and this is your very first time, you are still welcome here. So anyone who has said yes to Jesus, this table is open to you. We have a station up here. We have 2 at the back. So in a moment when I release you, you're invited to go to any of these stations. All of these elements at all stations are gluten-free, if that is a concern or worry for you. But I want you to be reminded this morning, as you take this bread and this cup, I want you to be reminded that it's a gift, that it's all grace. So this morning I'd invite you to stand. And I'm going to invite you to receive an invitation. I'm going to invite you to take a posture of receiving this morning. So I'm going to invite you, if you feel comfortable, just to hold your hands open in front of you like you're ready to take something, like you're ready to receive something. And I would invite you to receive this invitation this morning. Revolution Church, this is the table, not of the church, but of the Lord. It is made ready for those who love him and those who want to love him more. So the invitation is to come. You who have much faith and you who have little. You who have been here often and you who have not been here long. You who have tried to follow and you who have failed. Come, because it is Jesus who invites you. It is his will that those who want him should meet him here. Church, this is the body of Christ broken for you. The blood of Christ shed for you. The invitation is to come and receive. Amen.